This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
When you can have faith in your body always working for you, not against you, everything changes. The 101 really is that our stress hormones are there to save us, and they've been designed to do that. That's not your body breaking, that's actually your body working. You don't have to pretend to your children that these things don't happen. You can have these organic conversations from the minute they start to ask you about their body. Children are just like sponges. If they're watching you understand your body, then they're going to follow in those footsteps just by default.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? Welcome to the Season 2 Expert Series, where you'll meet 24 of the world's leaders in health discussing their passions and what it takes to make a shift.
We tend to be our harshest critics.
We are more than the muscle and bones in our body.
Whoa, that's so opposite of what I was taught growing up.
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hi, I'm Katherine Maslen, naturopath, author and host of The Shift. In the Expert Series, we share the insight, stories and expertise of each of our amazing experts. We're talking doctors, authors, naturopaths, researchers and thought leaders. You may have heard them on Season 2 of The Shift, where we took snippets of these interviews to put them together in the series for you. If you haven't listened to Season 2 yet, I'd highly recommend checking out Episode 1, which will give you an overview of what constitutes women's hormonal health and a sneak peek into the series. We'll provide a link in the show notes. Nat Kringoudis, also known as the hormone revolutionist, is a doctor of Chinese medicine and 2 times best-selling author. She is the host of the popular podcast The Wellness Collective and a specialist in women's health and natural fertility. She founded the Pagoda Tree, a clinic in Melbourne, Australia, where she has helped over 20,000 women rescue their hormones and reclaim their best life. Nat is on a mission to educate and empower women so they can get clued up on their bodies and take control of their hormonal health. She's an international speaker and has been featured in Mary Claire, Cosmopolitan and various TV outlets. I love Nat's down-to-earth approach. She has a wealth of knowledge and I can't wait for you guys to listen in. So let's begin. Nat Kringoudis, thank you so much for joining me on The Shift again. We were lucky enough to have you for Season 1, where we spoke all around gut health and the link with hormones. And I'm really pleased to interview you on what I really consider your full area of expertise, which is around hormonal health. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me back again.
So what I would love for the people that haven't listened to Season 1 of The Shift is just for you to introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, my background is traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. So way before it was even cool to have acupuncture as a treatment, I was offering those services in my clinic. And as a new practitioner, you know what it's like. You just put yourself out there and you take as much business as you can. And all of a sudden I was met with influx of women wanting help with their hormones. And you know, this is sort of 16 or so years ago. I had no idea how to help them. I'd studied gynecology at university, you know, as a specialist area, but I wasn't prepared for what they were showing me symptoms of. And so after a long time of pushing women away, I felt like eventually I couldn't do that anymore and decided, all right, I need to work out what's actually going on for these women because they weren't getting answers from their general practitioners. And there was definitely common symptoms that kept on coming up over and over and over again. So kind of just accepted the challenge, asked permission to practice because that's what we're all doing as practitioners anyway. We're always learning and growing, and really quickly had some great success in the clinic, which I guess put me on a little bit of a slipstream into where we are today. And I know there's lots of stuff that's happened in the meanwhile in amongst all of that, but that's really how I made my mark in fertility and hormones. And definitely back then, fertility was something that we didn't understand as much as we do now. But it wasn't until many years later that I really had this epiphany that if we could actually help young women understand their hormone issues and their gynecological problems, maybe we could make some shifts around their fertility long term, because once upon a time we were handed a pill packet as a solution, and over time we've definitely learned that it's not a solution to your hormone issues and really just flatlines everything. So really helping to empower young women and fix it before it's really broken at the times that symptoms start to arise has definitely become more of a more recent passion, I guess, when it comes to women's health. And, that comes with a whole lot of challenges as well, because talking to teenagers is one thing. Helping them to, not just want to take a pill to fix a problem is another. So it's been a bit of a wild ride, and I guess it's kind of come around in a backwards fashion, but that's the gist of how we've landed where we are today.
I love your book, and it's something that I recommend to all parents of daughters because it's such an important conversation to have. And I've got a beautiful 8-year-old girl as well, and she'll be getting a copy in a few years' time, definitely. So I definitely want to talk about some of that stuff around young women, menarche, their hormones. But to begin with, just to help our listeners, can you tell us a little bit of terminology? So first, I want to know, when someone talks about women's health, what does that actually mean?
Well, we're obviously wired a little bit differently to men. We work on a cycle that is very much in line with, a calendar, as opposed to a 24-hour cycle that we see men sort of follow the same patterns. And when I talk about this cycle, I'm talking about your menstrual cycle, and then everything kind of fits in and around that. But I think not every woman has a regular menstrual cycle, even though we would suggest that that's the norm, and that definitely is evidence of health. Doesn't mean you're not healthy if you don't have that, but it does mean that there's probably some type of hormone imbalance that we need to explore. So really looking at that difference when we talk about women's health, it is about specifically your hormones, your sex hormones, specifically your menstrual cycle, and what your body is sharing with you each and every day. The thing I think is really interesting and that we don't often talk about is, as women, if you look at the fact that we do have a menstrual cycle and our hormones obviously dictate that, every single day of your menstrual cycle, you're a different person. And that makes things a little bit tricky to navigate, really, because how you felt yesterday is potentially different to how you feel today. And then there's tomorrow to think about, and you're doing that cyclically every month or so. So helping to understand this, I think, is really important, helping to understand your body as a woman and recognizing it's not the same as a man, and really being able to embrace that, I think, is something that we've probably moved away from and are mostly coming back to again. And I think that encompasses this term of women's health.
So as women who have cycling hormones, which men do not, what are some of the consequences of that for our health in the short term as to what's happening throughout the cycle for us, and also in the long term?
Hormones are obviously the chemical messengers that tell your body what to do and how to behave. And some of them, I guess, we're more aware of than others. You're not sitting there being able to influence your, let's say, for example, your hormones that make you ovulate. You can't sit there and go, right, hormones, try as I might, I am going to absolutely influence that to happen today. That requires a symphony of various hormones to be released at certain times to allow that to happen. However, you can influence other hormones that you might have heard of, like your dopamine and your serotonin, by doing things like exercising or having a hug or doing something that you know that's going to allow you to release those feel-good hormones and endorphins. So it's a very broad term, but basically it's the messengers that indicate or influence and tell your body what to do. And I think the main two hormones we speak about really, especially for women's health, are your sex hormones and your stress hormones, and they're very much influential over each other. When your body is working and it's this nice symphony like I spoke about, there's generally relative balance between the sex hormones and the stress hormones. But you can probably start to see that if you are experiencing heightened stress, and who's not, unless we move to a desert island these days, all of us are constantly exposed to extra stress. The heightened stress can absolutely influence your sex hormones. So having this awareness is really important. And I also want to point out that your stress hormones or your stresses are not just you feeling stressed. I think we've associated feeling frazzled, feeling pressured, under the pump. That's stress. But stress is also how your liver's detoxifying, what your gut health is doing, how's your thyroid, what's your environment like, whether it's your workplace and relationships or it's the actual environment and the air quality or the water. It can be your emotional health. It can be your relationships. It can be driving a car or catching a flight. There's so many areas that stress can show up and then impact our sex hormones. And if this is happening every single day, it can have a pretty big impact on that. So the 101 really is that our stress hormones are there to save us, and they've been designed to do that. That's not your body breaking. That's actually your body working. And it means that they can often pull the handbrake on precious sex hormones like progesterone especially, and estrogen to a degree, that then impact your menstrual cycle. That can also impact your moods, your circadian rhythm, your sleep patterns, your weight. So many areas of your life will be impacted if they're not in balance. So in a short term, I would say heightened stress hormones, you're going to see issues with sleep. You're going to see issues with mood, maybe with energy. They're the sort of things that we see as a short-term response. But over a long term, we start to see things like ovulation pain, period pain, PMS or premenstrual syndrome, other issues like longer cycles or delayed periods, heavy periods. We can also start to see other things like acne, and we can see certain genetic traits turned on that weren't previously there, like polycystic ovarian syndrome or endometriosis or adenomyosis and some of those more serious gynecological issues. So the long-term consequence of stress can pretty much land you up in illness or disease. The short term obviously is a little bit easier to fix and something that you might start to recognize. But I think the first thing is understanding this is the role that your hormones play, and when they're not happy, the symptoms are actually quite wide and varied.
Can you tell me, in your practice with your patients, what are some ways that you help people to identify what's going on with stress and some of the strategies that you use to help with that?
I love this question because it's really not that hard, but we overcomplicate it as if it's the hardest thing that you're going to face today. When I ask you, first of all, hey, are you stressed? And you're right. The answer is usually, oh, I cope okay. It's like, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, can you identify you're stressed? And also, how is that relative to your day and how your day plays out? So I think that the first thing that we can actually do is recognize or acknowledge that we are. And for people that say they aren't, I'm sorry. It's impossible not to be. The collective energy of the world is stress. So how you think you can tap out of that? We're living just a really fast-paced lifestyle. And yeah, sure, you can choose to tap out, and some of us cope better than others. But the reality is that our thresholds are definitely heightened. And I see this often even in younger women, them getting their adrenals are being activated earlier and they're getting their periods earlier and earlier as a result. So the consequences are, they're long term, I think. But for patients, if I can say to them, okay, I want you to think about when you feel like you're overwhelmed. And I think the other problem with stress is it's the word. We've associated, like I said, with a whole lot of pressure and running late or feeling under the pump. But can you identify when you're feeling overwhelmed? And then when you're feeling overwhelmed, can you actually sit down for me and write down what your current stresses are? What is making you feel overwhelmed? Because the reality with stress is it becomes a really bad habit. We choose it to get a job done. And we also, many of us love to feel the pressure to get the job done. And all of a sudden, it's a coping mechanism and a means of an outcome. So I think the reality is we need to be aware of what we're actually stressed about. And writing a list, I think, is the best way to get it out of your head. Because when you get it out of your head, all of a sudden you look at that piece of paper and you might go, oh, there's only like 6 things on there and 5 of them don't even warrant my stress. So that recognition, I think, is the first thing that we can do. And patients love this technique. They absolutely love it. And then the second thing I get patients to do in terms of helping them to shift the perspective, because the reality is you can't not necessarily stress. Stress is actually a great thing if you know how to use it properly. I get them to ask themselves the question, what happens if this stressful situation or this feeling or whatever it was put there so that you could actually get the outcome that you wanted. And you could get the outcome you wanted without a whole lot of overwhelm. And just shifting that perspective and asking the what if question. And what if I didn't react? What if I didn't freak out? What if I just went, okay, and now what am I going to do? Would that have a different outcome? No, it probably wouldn't. But the way that you get there would be very different, and it wouldn't impact your other hormones as much. And so it's just these shifts, I think, in perspective that really do help us to cope a little bit better. Like I said, it starts with awareness and then a shift in perspective. And I think that's a really great tool. For some of us, if our health is in disarray, that can be near impossible, especially our gut health. You know, our gut is also our emotion center, as we've learned. So if that's not working very well, it can be really difficult to be able to identify this. And that's where working with, you know, your healthcare provider can be really important to kind of break the cycle. Maybe we start with some supplements and some treatments to allow you to get stronger to then be able to see that. But it's not just I can do this today. But I think drawing on the support of other people to identify that can sometimes be just as important. But those things are something that people can start with just recognizing, I think, in any minute of any day.
Do you think that women are more stressed than men in general?
Women have a different coping mechanism to men. Men cope not very well, but they cope better with the pressure that we're talking about, that overwhelming pressure, the deadline. They're designed to do that. Women are great multitaskers, as we know, and that comes with lots of little facets of stress. So I think to answer that, I think the issue is that we look at ourselves as humans and we're all one and the same. And we're not. And there's definitely more masculine women as there are more feminine males, and it's a bit of a proportion. But on the whole, women aren't designed to have that high level constant stress, and it definitely shows up in their other hormone patterns, whereas men tend to cope a bit better with that just by the nature of their own hormones and how they're built. So, yeah, I think that women definitely need to tap into that feminine energy to help us cope with stress, and that's our superpower. If we can do that, that's how we get what we want. It's just a matter of identifying we don't have to do that in a masculine way necessarily.
Do you feel like stress with young children as well? There's obviously trauma, or if there's some instability in the home and things like that. But do you feel like social media and just society and the crazy and busyness of things as they are today plays a role in that too?
Absolutely. I know when we were kids, if you had a bad day at school and someone was being mean or you were getting bullied, you got to tap out. You got to go home, and that was your sanctuary. You had the support and love of your family, and you got to tap out. Nowadays, you don't have that because social media is 24/7. These kids are on these devices, whether they're texting or communicating via games or on social media. They are basically able to access each other well into the evening and early in the morning. So if you are experiencing that bullying, there's where do you go for respite? Where do you get to tap out unless you turn it off or your parent takes it away from you? And it's addictive as well. So unfortunately, kids they don't have that ability and that awareness to be able to put down the device and walk away and say, I'm not entertaining that now. That comes with experiencing growth. They don't have that. They're quite immature, I think for what they would be experiencing on social media, they are immature for a very long time before they're able to understand and compute that in their minds. So I'm watching that happen, and I think it's scary. My daughter's 12 and we're definitely entering into that phase. My only saving grace with her is she's off with the fairies. So, but for the children that are very sensitive, that is it's a lot to be able to handle.
Gut health is central to everything, so it may be good to get some additional support. Many of my listeners have opted to do my 8-week Heal Your Gut program. In this 8-week course, I'll take you through the strategies that I use with my patients in clinic every day to heal the gut and give you the lifelong tools you need to support your gut health. To join us, go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Programs and Courses.
The Shift!
So what I wanted to ask you, Nat, was If a young child gets their period, so, I had a patient just the other day, her daughter got her period 9 years old. So we're seeing these like 8, 9, 10-year-olds getting their period. Are they equipped for that? What is the psychological consequences for that, particularly if they're not prepared? They haven't read your book, for instance. Their parents don't talk about it. What do you think the consequence is for those children?
If it's this bomb that's dropped on you at the age of 9, you're never going to be, at that point, I don't think, unless you're extremely mature for your age, psychologically prepared for that. I think taking a step back first, if I can talk more about our role as parents, and I think this is where some of us have, and I know I feel the same, I put myself in this category, I didn't open the conversation early enough. And as soon as I was aware of that, I did. But I wish someone had have been able to say to me, hey, you don't have to pretend to your children that these things don't happen. You can have these organic conversations from the minute they start to ask you about their body, from the minute that they say, hey, Mum, where did I come from? Instead of saying, ask your father, or, oh, the doctor put you in there, or the stork delivered you, we can have the conversation then and there because the child is actually ready when they're asking. It can be age appropriate, of course. It doesn't have to be this graphic detail, but just enough to keep the facts because kids love that. And it's interesting, we have an emotional attachment to especially our sexual experiences. They don't have that. So we can feel a bit embarrassed by talking about it, depending on, which area of your reproductive health you're talking about. We can feel a bit awkward about that. But if you just deliver children the facts, they're generally pretty satisfied with that. And if they ask another question, they're ready to learn more. And so I think being able to have that awareness from a really early age, so it is this beautiful, organic conversation that continues throughout their childhood and teen years. So nothing actually becomes taboo, weird, or not spoken of. And I can guarantee you too, we can feel a bit funny about that as parents, but the first time you do that and you open up that conversation honestly, it'll be far less difficult than you think, and then it gets to grow from there. I know we're not as confident as, each other. I think the other side of this is that we weren't taught properly as adults. So how are we supposed to pass this information on if we don't understand ourselves properly? So there's two parts to that. I think we've got a responsibility as adults and as parents to start to talk about this from a very young age to prevent it being this big issue or this big thing that happens when all of a sudden a girl starts menstruating. And if it's not nice for a 9-year-old to get their period, of course, but if they had that from a young age, none of that would happen. But having said that, if it is happening and there has been no conversation, I guess very quickly it's about having plenty of open and honest conversations, asking and answering a lot of questions, and again, age appropriate. So you can still do that at no matter what age that you realise that, actually we need to start talking about this, and to not make it taboo, to not make it weird, to just make it a part of life and a fact. And it really is about conversations. There's not much else there is that you can do, I don't think, to help through that process and growth and maturation, I guess, at that point in time. So it is tricky, but I think that the solution is going to take some time to change the way we do this. I think schools are doing a much better job of this now, just watching Olivia go through it. However, it depends on who it's taught by, and kids are still scared of getting their period because, of course, it's unknown. I think the taboo and the scariness needs to be removed, and hopefully we can switch it more to being about being curious and excited for the day that happens rather than something that's horrible and gross and potentially problemsome.
Absolutely agree with everything you said just then. And I guess the other conversation, and as I was saying with my 8-year-old at the moment, that I've been having with friends and mothers is around sexuality, because she is 8 years old and she recently learnt out where babies came from, told me matter-of-factly, science-based, this is what happens. She was very specific. And I was like, well, yep, that happens. But the thing that really alarmed me was that a friend of mine, somebody that she knows, had her child and the cousins. So it was like a family gathering. The cousins were all around, and the older cousins, they walked in on the older cousins showing the younger cousins pornography on the iPad. And the younger ones were like 7, 8, 9. And I guess with this age of technology, you know, I feel like we need to run the narrative. We need to talk about what's normal and really help them with that. And I know you talk about sexuality and those kind of things in your book. So I'd love to hear what you think around that.
Yeah, I think, again, it comes down to these conversations. And again, going back to what I've said, still starting from the beginning when we're being asked, so that it's not this strange thing that's happening. And then also the conversation will then roll into the teen years about what that then looks like moving forward and what your sexual experiences should be and look like. And I know when we were writing Beautiful You, we did some research around, we asked teens where they were getting their information on their sexuality from. And it was astonishing. It was like 52% were Googling it. And unfortunately, that's a slippery slope, as you can imagine, because anything you type in generally leads you to some type of porn, really, at the end of the day. And then teens' expectations are totally skewed because that's what they think that their first sexual encounter is going to look and feel like. And even they're paid actors. So really having that conversation, I think, is very important. I think it's very important for women to not feel like that's what it needs to look and be like. In the book, we talk about when should I have sex? When should I have sex? And I never had these conversations. I never had that. I went to a Catholic school. It was like a hard no. You're just not having it. And if you do, you're going to fall pregnant. And we know that that's not the case. And especially for many women, they can't fall pregnant. So you can spend, a lifetime trying to stop falling pregnant only to find it's not as easy as you thought. But also understanding your body as a woman is very, very important. And again, also being able to have enough understanding because of these conversations over many, many years as to when the time, in inverted commas, is right. And I really wanted to help young women understand that it's going to be scary, but it should be scary exciting, not scary awful. And that there's no time that's perfect for you to do that. The reality is teens are doing it anyway. So the more information that they can have as to what that should look like, I think the better. And that it is just when they want to, and that there's a reason why as parents we encourage them to explore, but we want them to do that safely, because once you have had sex, there is a whole lot of emotions that are released, that a whole lot of attachment, and it's also about the consequences of that. So I did really open up that conversation, and I basically said there's no right time, it's just your time. But if you could know that it was going to be nice rather than horrible, wouldn't you prefer to explore what that was like? And that's only going to come as you get older, as you get more confident with yourself, as you understand your body more, and as you respect yourself and know what your boundaries are for yourself as well. So it is a hard conversation to have, and that's obviously why we wrote the book. But I do still come back to that same thing. It's about conversation over many years and having an open and honest environment where kids can feel safe to ask those questions, not that we're going to judge them for it because, like I said, they're doing it anyway. And if not, they're getting information from their friends or the internet.
Can you tell me, Nat, what is the period of development that would be classed as actually having passed through puberty and being sexually mature?
So we know that hormones generally mature around the age of 21. And it's different for everybody, obviously, but I'm glad you asked that question, because I think one of the other things we need to understand is that that's not smooth sailing necessarily during that time. And it's normal for there to be periods of time where sometimes our menstrual cycles are irregular, sometimes they are heavier, sometimes there's different variants to them. They're not going to be smack bang 28 days smooth sailing necessarily. I don't want them to be painful. No one should ever be in pain. That's definitely evidence of inflammation, and we want to treat that absolutely. The biggest issue I see, and the reason I loved that question, is because so many young girls are put on the oral contraceptive pill in their teens because of either contraception or irregular or problematic periods, or any hormonal imbalance really will warrant you being prescribed the pill. And the issue with that is at the age that you start taking the pill, your hormones are halted. So if you're 16 and you're definitely not at that age of 21 where your hormones are considered mature, then you are as hormonally mature as a 16-year-old up until the time that you stop taking that birth control. So for a lot of women, that could be maybe 32, 33, and all of a sudden they're finding themselves in a situation where their hormones are everywhere. And that's because they've basically picked up where they left off when they were 16. So again, that can also be problematic because if you are prescribed the pill for a gynecological issue, it can't treat it. And so you're left with the same thing but tenfold 10 years later, 15 years later, and the actual issue, even though you thought you were all the while managing it, you've actually potentially not just ignored it, but it can be much worse because we know the pill robs the body of a vitamin we know the pill robs the body of certain vitamins and minerals. We know it upsets the microbiome, definitely can then lead to other hormone imbalances, and it just doesn't fix the issue at hand. So I think that's really important because a lot of mothers will say, oh my goodness, my daughter's 16. I'm really worried. Her periods are irregular. Let's get the pill. Or the doctor says, let's get the pill. And that's just, you're us trusting that our doctor is looking and doing the right things. I think, again, it's not your doctor's fault. I just will say that often we go to our GP for issues we probably should see our gynecologist for. And so if we were seeing our gynecologist, then maybe there would be more investigation done. And definitely in more recent times, we are looking further into hormonal issues earlier than later. So that's really great as well. But I will also speak to the mother that's worried about their daughter falling pregnant at 16 or, in their teen years and feel like the pill is their insurance policy. I have great issues with that, A, because their hormones aren't mature, like I said. And I should also say that we know that the later you start the pill, the less implications it tends to have on your hormones. But also 16-year-olds really need to be practicing safe sex. And if they're not practicing safe sex, that opens them up to a whole lot of other issues, especially STDs and other infections. So I think the best thing that we can do for our teenagers is teach them their menstrual cycle, teach them when they're fertile, teach them what that means, teach them to understand the ebbs and flows. And it's not that hard. And if we knew that as teenagers, I would say that there'd be a whole generation of women right now that will be living very different lives. It's certainly not that hard. It's certainly not that risky. And I've practiced fertility awareness forever. And I have 2 children. I don't want any more. And I'm on the other side of it where I look and go, once you know this about yourself, you can't not know it. The only way that someone could actually get me pregnant now is I'd have to be blind drunk off my face because it's impossible to not know once you understand your body rhythms. And I think, again, as women, we really need to trust in our own body wisdom. Society has just taught us to not trust ourselves and not trust our bodies, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
What are some of the signs that things may be a little bit imbalanced around the period, so around the bleed and what happens around that time?
Anything that doesn't feel good is indicative of some type of imbalance. You shouldn't feel anything other than maybe a little bit more tired, maybe a little bit more hungry, maybe a little bit heavy. So anything outside of that, whether it's pain, whether it's mood swings, whether it's heavy bleeding, whether it's very scanty bleeding, skin changes, digestive changes, anything that's not actually I can't get up and do my normal thing without thinking about it sort of stuff is definitely going to show signs of hormone imbalance. And you don't just experience hormone imbalance symptoms at the period time. You might see them also at ovulation time. That's fairly common, ovulation pain being a big one. Some women feel nauseous at that time as well, and they can feel moody at that time too. Tender breast is another thing that we can often see throughout that luteal phase that can indicate hormone imbalance. Headaches, they're the most common, I guess, things that we tend to see. And missing periods or a delayed period, that can be a sign of, obviously, of hormone imbalance as well. So it's important to understand that those things are definitely related to your hormones. The easiest way to work out if something's hormonal is ask yourself, is this cyclic? Does this come around every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks? Then you can generally say, yes, okay, this is hormonal. Whereas if you have acne 24/7, 7 days a week, then there's a chance that it's not just hormonal, that there's other things that are at play. Yes, there's a hormonal element to it, but there's probably other things that you need to look at. That's probably the best clue I can give people to look at. Is it cyclic or is it just a daily occurrence?
I'd love to dig into period pain a little bit more. Can you tell me what are some of the reasons why a woman might get period pain, and is any pain at all considered normal?
Pain anywhere, really, we would never take as normal. It's interesting that over time we've developed this concept that period pain is normal. Period pain is common, it's not normal. And I know growing up as a teenager, my mum just used to say, "Oh, Nat, I'm so sorry. It's just part of it. It's just part of being a woman." And as a 42-year-old, I'm bitter now because you don't have to have it. So pain anywhere in the body, is a result of inflammation at the foundation level. We know that that can be for various reasons. When it comes to period pain, if we look at what's actually going on, you have tissue in your body that's bleeding. And so when we see heightened pain, we can often see that in a response to something. So whether it's just more inflammation, more prostaglandins, more pain as a response to the inflammation. So prostaglandins are obviously released in a response to inflammation and can definitely lead to pain. And obviously when there's more bleeding, then that can be the case. But also in cases of endometriosis, let's say, we can often see pain at the period time because blood's not moving in the right direction. And that's a very common reason why we will see period pain. And adenomyosis is another reason that we might also see period pain. But fundamentally, that all comes down to either things not going or moving in the right direction. When there's pelvic congestion, we can see pain as well. I think also for women, often heavy bleeding comes with more pain, but you can also have women that have very scant bleeding and have a lot of pain too. And these are the women, and this is why I love Chinese medicine too, is you can have two women that have endometriosis. One bleeds profusely and the other one barely bleeds at all. And so there's, two very different scenarios and a different way that we would look at that. So I think that they're the most common reasons. Some women will say, I have PCOS and I have a lot of pain, but PCOS tends to have pain randomly at any time. It's not so much the period time, and that's, I wouldn't say, is characteristic of PCOS to have pain at the period time. I think it's more just pelvic pain in general. And I guess there's other reasons women can have pain. If there's, issues with veins or structural issues as well can cause pain, but then probably not as common.
Have you listened to season 1 of The Shift? If you're enjoying this conversation, you'll love season 1, where we deep dive into the field of gut health with 24 of the world leaders in this area. Once you're done, head back to your podcast app and find episode 1. It's a great place to start. I want to talk about this concept of trust in ourselves mostly, and particularly for women, why a lot of us don't trust our body or know how to listen to our natural body's wisdom. What would you say around that, Nat?
I think, again, that comes down to that young age and that we aren't having those conversations. And also, children are just like sponges. If they're watching you understand your body, then they're going to follow in those footsteps just by default. But if we've kept that information or we're not talking about it and it doesn't seem like something that you would ordinarily do, then, it's something that I guess isn't normal. So I think body wisdom really is something that we are or should be ingraining from that young age again, and having complete faith. And when you can have faith in your body always working for you, not against you, everything changes. I guess some of that requires you, if this is all new to you at some point, you might have to jump. You might have to have the faith and jump. And then as you come down, you can realize that, actually, I do understand myself. I do know what's going on. Your daily rhythms and your signs that your body gives you each and every day are actually so obvious. They're so obvious once you know. You can't, like I said, you can't not know once you know. So I just think that trusting yourself, getting the knowledge, starting to get curious, getting the knowledge, watching your body rhythms, and then being able to trust that, it really should be a given. I know it's easier said than done, but there's so much information out there nowadays that allow us to do that. And there's even devices that kind of can back us up until such a time that we feel confident to watch our body rhythms. I just find it mind-boggling that people go, I just don't trust myself. I just don't trust myself. It's like, really? But you trust me with your body, but you don't trust yourself with your body. It seems weird, right?
One last question. If you could give just one piece of advice to someone that wants to make a shift in their health, what would it be?
I think that focusing on the feeling, not so much the goal, is probably the quickest way to take us somewhere. We get very fixated on the outcome. But say, for example, focusing on having a pain-free period, it's not so much the pain-free period, it's like, what would it feel like to have a pain-free period, and inviting that feeling in. Now, you have to take action to get that, obviously, but just allowing yourself to feel the relief of that, feel whatever the feeling is for you that's associated with that, allows your perception to open bigger and allow that to happen. I think another great example of that is for people trying to conceive, and I say to them, I want you to start to think, act and behave as if you're already pregnant. It just shifts the perspective. It doesn't mean they don't have to not have sex or, do the things to fall pregnant, but it shifts the way that we see it and allows us to get there with a little bit more ease and definitely less stress. So focus on the feeling, not the goal.
I love that. Thank you so much, Nat Kringoudis.
Thank you for having me.
There was some great information in this episode, so let's make sure we've gotten some of the key points and what action you can take as a result of this. Men and women are not the same. Men run on a 24-hour clock, whereas women have changes throughout their cycle that make us more susceptible to being thrown out of whack. Your stress hormones are there to save you, and when they are high, they are doing the job they were designed to do. While we can take herbs and get acupuncture to support our stress response and reduce these hormones, ultimately it is our behaviours, mindset, and the way in which we exist that needs to change to prevent issues with stress. We need to trust our body's wisdom, and we need to teach our kids to do the same. Having open conversations about the normal functions of the body are so important to kids and teens. If you have a teenage girl, I'd highly recommend Nat's book, Beautiful You, which is a wonderful guide for this time in their lives. Learning is great, but action is better. Here are a few things that you could do as a result of this conversation in order to help you shift your health and your life. Be honest with yourself about your stress. Stress kills more people than smoking, yet it is so normalised that it's easy to ignore. Find support to help you manage in the way of acupuncture, hypnotherapy, meditation, and herbal medicines. But ultimately, you need to think about how you are existing day to day and what you can do differently to be less stressed. More of this on episode 9 of season 2 of The Shift, Stress, Mindset, Your Internal Dialogue and Health. Go check it out. Get wise. If you're listening to this podcast, then you must be on a journey to know more. Keep tuning in, read books, listen to podcasts, and see someone that can help you decipher what is going on in your own body. You don't have to do it all on your own. Lastly, can you pass this podcast on to someone who has a young daughter to help them understand them better? The more parents can be aware of what is happening with their kids, the more they can avoid some of the issues that can come up around their hormonal health. Thank you so much, Nat Kringoudis, for sharing your knowledge with us on The Shift once again. If you like this episode, please let us know by sharing on social media and tagging Nat and myself, Katherine Maslen, or The Shift Clinic so we can hear what you have to say. You can find out more about Nat Kringoudis at her website, natkringoudis.com. That's NATKRINGOUDIS.com, or say hello on Instagram, where Nat posts heaps of helpful tips and content too. In the next episode of the Shift Expert series, we have Tiffany Cruikshank, founder of Yoga Medicine, author of 2 books, and an inspiration in the health and wellness space. Make sure you tune in.
Coming up on The Shift.
Yoga has been a really big tool for me for so many shifts in my life. There's so many different layers to be curious to and to explore in a yoga practice. What I love about it is it invites each person into the conversation of bringing themselves back together. What's beautiful about the female physiology is that we have a really unique perspective into our physiology through our cycle. Our hormones, as I think most women probably have experienced, are everything. They create literally how we feel.
This series is a production of The Shift Clinic. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice
And inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
From climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The global goals.
A 15-year plan for everyone,
Everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The global goals are a framework that collectively help us
Support the health of our people.
And the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the global goals.
This project supports global goal number 6.
clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.